The storm raged over the small town of Brooksville, drenching the streets in a relentless downpour. Rain hammered against rooftops, gushing from overflowing gutters and pooling in the uneven cracks of the deserted market square. Wind howled through the empty stalls, rattling loose sheets of rusted tin and sending discarded papers swirling into the darkness. Thunder roared like a beast in the sky, illuminating the world below with sudden flashes of electric blue. Chained to a corroded iron post in the middle of the abandoned marketplace, a German shepherd stood motionless against the storm. His fur, once thick and majestic, now clung to his frail frame in matted, tangled clumps. Every rib was visible beneath his soaked coat, his body trembling not from the cold, but from exhaustion. The metal collar around his neck had rubbed his skin raw, leaving an angry red ring beneath damp fur. Each time lightning streaked across the heavens, his ears twitched, but he did not flinch. He had learned long ago that resistance was futile. His name had once meant something: Bentley. A proud, powerful name. A name that had once been called with admiration and trust. But that life was gone now, buried beneath months of neglect and solitude. His golden brown eyes, dimmed with fatigue, still held a flicker of something unbroken. Perhaps defiance, perhaps a quiet plea. But no one was there to see it. No one was coming for him. Not anymore. The market had long since emptied, its vendors seeking shelter from the unforgiving storm. Hours had passed. But Bentley remained tethered to the rusting post, abandoned like a discarded relic. Water rose steadily around his paws, swirling in muddy currents that threatened to swallow the ground beneath him. His tail lay limp against the cold pavement, his legs locked in place as if standing was the only thing keeping him from disappearing entirely. He did not cry out for help. He had learned that no one ever listened, but someone did. 3 blocks away, nestled in the warm glow of a modest 2-story home, 6-year-old Sophia Carter pressed her face against the rain-slicked window pane. Her breath fogged against the glass as she strained to see through the curtain of falling water. Her small fingers traced the raindrops trickling down the window, mirroring the silent tears welling in her wide blue eyes. She had heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, a lonely, aching howl carried on the wind. It had reached her not just through her ears, but somewhere deeper, as if the sadness behind it had spoken directly to her heart. It wasn't the sound of a feral creature or a distant dog barking in the night. No, this was something else. A voice of loss, of despair. "Mom," she whispered, not daring to look away from the window. "He's still out there." Emily Carter, her mother, stood in the doorway, folding freshly laundered towels. She barely glanced up. "Who, sweetheart?" "The dog," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's crying." Emily sighed, setting the towels down. She walked over, peering through the rain-streaked glass. All she saw was darkness, the occasional flicker of a street lamp casting long, swaying shadows across the quiet neighborhood. "It's probably just someone's pet," she murmured, running a gentle hand through her daughter's curls. "They're safe inside by now." "No," Sophia insisted, shaking her head. "I saw him today, at the market. He was tied up. He looked sad." Emily hesitated. She knew her daughter. Sophia had always been different, special, in a way she couldn't quite explain. Even as a toddler, she had shown an unusual connection to animals, a sensitivity beyond her years. She wasn't the kind of child to imagine things. If she said she had seen something, she had. Still, a dog left alone in a storm? That seemed unlikely. Across the room, Benjamin Stewart, Sophia's father, sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. He hadn't said a word, but he had been listening. Something about the urgency in Sophia's voice made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A former Marine, Benjamin had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were whispering that something wasn't right. Pushing his chair back, he stood, crossing the room in a few long strides. He peered out into the storm, his sharp eyes scanning the dark horizon. He saw nothing but sheets of rain, trees bending under the force of the wind. But then, there, a faint, distant glimmer of movement, a silhouette against the backdrop of the storm. He narrowed his gaze. It was too large to be a stray cat, too still to be just another shifting shadow. A dog, chained, and the water around it was rising. Benjamin exhaled slowly, setting down his mug. His wife turned to him, an unspoken question in her eyes. He grabbed his keys. "I'm going to check it out." The wind howled like a living creature, rattling window panes and shaking the trees that lined the quiet streets of Brooksville. Rain pounded against the pavement in relentless sheets, turning the roads into glistening rivers of water that rushed toward the town's drainage system, already overflowing. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground with each deafening roar. It was the kind of storm that sent people indoors, bolting doors and windows, praying for it to pass. But Benjamin Stewart wasn't one to stay inside when something didn't feel right. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, though he knew it would do little against the torrential rain. His wife, Emily, watched him with a mixture of concern and resignation. She knew that look. Benjamin had always been a man of action, unwilling to ignore a gut feeling, especially when it involved someone, or something, in trouble. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Benjamin nodded, stuffing a flashlight into his pocket. "If there's a dog out there chained up, it won't survive this storm." A clap of thunder rattled the house, making Sophia jump. She stood in the doorway, clutching the hem of her oversized pajama shirt, her big blue eyes filled with silent pleading. "I heard him, Daddy," she whispered. "I know he's still out there." That was all the confirmation Benjamin needed. "Stay here with Mom," he told Sophia. But the 6-year-old shook her head violently. "I want to help." Benjamin hesitated. He glanced at Emily, who pursed her lips but didn't argue. She knew their daughter too well, knew that trying to keep her inside would only break her heart. And so, with a resigned sigh, she grabbed her coat. "If she's going, I'm going too." The three of them rushed out into the storm, the wind nearly knocking Sophia off her feet as Benjamin scooped her up into his arms. The drive to the market was treacherous, the roads slick and littered with branches torn from trees. Water pooled in the gutters, swelling over sidewalks and creeping toward storefronts. The wipers fought against the relentless rain, barely improving visibility. When they reached the marketplace, Benjamin slowed the SUV, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. The place was nearly unrecognizable. Floodwater had turned the ground into a shallow lake, debris floating aimlessly in the dark currents. Most of the vendor stalls were empty, their tarps flapping wildly in the wind. And then he saw him. Bentley. The German shepherd was exactly where Sophia had said he'd be, his body partially submerged in the rising water. The heavy chain around his neck was taut, keeping him bound to the rusted metal post. He was fighting to keep his head above the swirling flood, his paws slipping against the slick pavement as he struggled for footing. For a moment, Benjamin couldn't believe the dog was still trying. Most animals would have given up by now, allowed exhaustion to drag them down beneath the water. But Bentley refused. His legs trembled, his ribs heaving with each breath. Yet he remained standing, his eyes flickering with something raw and unyielding. Determination. Survival. But time was running out. "He's drowning!" Sophia's scream cut through the chaos of the storm. "Daddy, do something!" Benjamin threw the car into park. "Stay here," he ordered as he yanked the door open. But Sophia didn't listen. Before Emily could grab her, the little girl was out of the car, rain drenching her hair in seconds. She ran toward the edge of the flood, her bare feet splashing into the water as she stretched out her arms. "Bentley!" she called, though she didn't know why she called him that. The name just felt right. "It's okay. We're here." The dog's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. Through the sheets of rain, his tired amber eyes locked onto hers. For the first time since the storm began, Bentley stopped fighting. He simply stared at her, unmoving, as if trying to decide whether to trust the small human calling out to him. Benjamin didn't hesitate. He sprinted into the flood, the icy water swallowing him up to his knees in an instant. He forced himself forward, each step sluggish against the force of the current. The moment he reached Bentley, he grabbed the rusted chain and yanked. It didn't budge. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling the bolt cutters from his belt. His hands trembled from the cold, the rain blurring his vision as he positioned the cutters around the thick metal links. Bentley let out a deep, guttural growl. Benjamin stilled. He wasn't afraid. Not of dogs, not of the bite that could very well follow. But he knew better than to push a terrified animal too hard. He glanced at Bentley's face, taking in the way the dog's ears flattened against his head, his muscles coiled tight with instinctual resistance. Bentley didn't know him. He didn't know if this man was here to help or to hurt him. Benjamin exhaled slowly, steadying himself against the current. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. "I'm getting you out of here." But Bentley didn't relax, because Bentley wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking past him, at Sophia. The little girl had inched closer, her tiny hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't afraid. Not of the rain. Not of the flood. Not even of the dog whose life hung in the balance. She knelt at the water's edge, stretching her hand out toward him. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to be scared." The wind howled, lightning illuminating the moment in a frozen snapshot of time. Sophia, fragile and drenched, reaching out. Bentley, muscles shaking, staring at her with something that almost looked like longing. And then he moved, not toward Benjamin, toward Sophia. Bentley didn't lunge or snap. He simply lifted his front paw, taking one slow, unsteady step toward the girl who had called his name. The girl who had seen him, not just a broken, abandoned dog, but something more, something worth saving. Benjamin seized the opportunity. With a final forceful squeeze of the bolt cutters, the chain snapped. Bentley jolted, his legs giving out beneath him. He collapsed into the water, his body momentarily vanishing beneath the surface. Sophia screamed. Benjamin acted on instinct, catching the dog before the current could sweep him away. He grabbed Bentley's scruff, hoisting him upward, struggling to support the weight of a fully grown German shepherd. Bentley coughed, water dripping from his snout as he fought to regain his balance. "Hold on, buddy," Benjamin grunted, dragging him toward the SUV. Emily was already there, the back doors flung open. Together, they hauled Bentley inside, wrapping him in the dry blankets Emily had grabbed in a last-minute moment of foresight. The dog trembled violently, his body racked with exhaustion, but he didn't resist. Because he had made his decision. He had chosen them. As Benjamin climbed into the driver's seat, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Bentley lay curled up in the back, his head resting against Sophia's lap. The little girl stroked his damp fur, whispering softly to him. "You're safe now," she promised. Bentley let out a low sigh. And for the first time in a very, very long time, he closed his eyes, not in fear, but in peace. A bond had been formed, an unbreakable connection forged in the heart of the storm, and none of them would ever be the same again. The rain had finally stopped by the time the Stewart family pulled into their driveway. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, their soft glow casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Inside the SUV, Bentley lay motionless in the back seat, his massive body curled up against Sophia's legs. She hadn't let go of him since they had rescued him from the flood, her small hands tangled in his damp fur, whispering reassurances he likely didn't understand, but seemed to find comforting. Benjamin turned off the engine and twisted in his seat to get a better look at the dog. Most strays, especially those that had been mistreated, would be restless, frightened, even aggressive in unfamiliar environments. But Bentley was different. He didn't shake, didn't cower. Instead, he sat up, his ears perking slightly as his amber eyes scanned the driveway, the porch, the street beyond. He wasn't just looking around, he was assessing, analyzing, as if his survival depended on it. That was the first sign. Emily opened the back door, draping a warm towel over Bentley's soaked fur. "Come on, big guy," she murmured. "Let's get you inside." Bentley didn't bolt out of the car the way most rescued dogs might. He moved carefully, deliberately, his muscles coiling and shifting as if every movement was calculated. His paws met the ground with quiet precision, and he stood still for a long moment, taking in his new surroundings. His gaze flickered to Benjamin, then to Emily, then back to Sophia, as though he was making a silent decision about whether or not he could trust them. Sophia reached for his collarless neck, scratching gently behind his ears. "It's okay," she whispered, and Bentley exhaled a deep breath before finally stepping onto the porch. Once inside, Emily had already prepared a soft blanket near the fireplace, along with a bowl of warm broth. But Bentley didn't immediately rush to the food like a starving stray might. Instead, he stood in the center of the living room, turning his head slightly as if listening for something. Benjamin, watching him closely, felt a strange chill run down his spine. "You see that?" he murmured to Emily. She frowned. "See what?" "He's not acting like a regular rescue dog," Benjamin said, lowering his voice instinctively. "No panic, no skittishness. He's in control, even now." Bentley's ears twitched, and he turned his head slightly as if he had heard them whispering. His sharp eyes met Benjamin's, studying him with a quiet intensity. Then, as if making some internal decision, Bentley finally walked to the blanket and lay down, not collapsing in exhaustion, but easing his body into position with the disciplined grace of a soldier settling into a post. That was the second sign. Later that night, as the household settled into an uneasy calm, Bentley remained alert, while Emily and Benjamin tried to figure out what to do next, whether to contact animal control, take him to a vet in the morning, or attempt to find his owner. Sophia refused to leave his side. She curled up on the couch next to him, her little fingers idly tracing circles on his back. "I think he likes it here," she murmured sleepily. Benjamin wasn't sure about that. Bentley didn't seem at ease. He seemed watchful. By the time midnight rolled around, Emily had fallen asleep, and Benjamin was finishing up some work at the kitchen table. The only sound in the house was the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of the heater kicking on. Then Bentley moved. It was so subtle that Benjamin almost missed it. 1 second, the dog had been lying beside Sophia, his breathing deep and steady. The next, he was standing, ears pricked, his head turned toward the hallway that led to the front door. Benjamin frowned. "What is it, boy?" Bentley didn't look at him. Instead, he took a step forward, his body tensing in a way that made the hairs on Benjamin's arms stand up. A deep, quiet growl rumbled in his chest. Not aggressive, not panicked. It was measured. A warning. Benjamin pushed back his chair and rose to his feet, just as the motion sensor light outside flicked on. Someone was out there. He moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows as he peeked out. A man was walking down the sidewalk, his hood pulled low over his face, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He wasn't doing anything obviously suspicious, just strolling past, head tilted downward, shoulders hunched against the cold. But something about him made Benjamin uneasy, and Bentley felt it too. The dog stood at full attention, his stance rigid, his eyes locked on the door. His tail remained still, no wagging, no fear, just steady, silent vigilance. Benjamin didn't move. He waited, watching as the man disappeared down the street, swallowed by darkness. Bentley waited too, standing completely still until the motion light flickered off again. Only then did he let out a breath, his muscles relaxing ever so slightly. Benjamin turned slowly, studying the dog in a new light. That was the third sign. He walked back toward the living room and knelt beside Bentley. The dog met his gaze, unblinking, as if he knew exactly what Benjamin was thinking. "You're not just some stray, are you?" Benjamin murmured. Bentley didn't respond, of course, but he didn't need to. The way he carried himself, the way he listened, the way he reacted to a possible threat, it all pointed to one thing. This dog had been trained. Highly trained. Benjamin reached out slowly, running his hand along Bentley's side, feeling the firmness of his muscles beneath his thick coat. He wasn't just strong, he was conditioned, his body built for endurance and precision. Memories stirred in the back of Benjamin's mind. His time in the Marines. The way K-9 units moved, how they thought. He'd seen dogs like this before. He'd worked with them. They weren't just pets. They were partners, soldiers. And Bentley, whoever he had once been, had served. But if that were true, then the real question was, what had happened to him? How had a dog this well-trained ended up abandoned in a flooded marketplace, left to die in the storm? Sophia stirred slightly in her sleep, shifting against Bentley's side. The dog immediately softened, lowering his head to nuzzle against her shoulder. His entire posture changed, his alertness melting into something warm, something gentle. Benjamin watched them for a long moment. Then he made a decision. They weren't calling animal control in the morning. They were keeping Bentley right where he was, because whatever had happened to this dog, whoever had left him behind, there was a reason he had ended up here. And Benjamin was going to find out what it was. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the Stewart household. But despite the calm exterior, tension simmered beneath the surface. Bentley had settled in well, perhaps too well. He moved through the house with practiced ease, as if it were instinctual to patrol each room, check the doors, and position himself near Sophia whenever she was alone. It was a behavior Benjamin couldn't ignore. Something about Bentley's mannerisms gnawed at him. The precise way he moved, the unwavering focus in his eyes, it was all too calculated, too disciplined. This wasn't a typical rescue dog. This was a dog with a past, a purpose, and Benjamin was going to find out what it was. Later that afternoon, Benjamin loaded Bentley into the back seat of his truck and drove toward the veterinary clinic. Dr. Rachel Bennett, an experienced veterinarian who had worked with military and police dogs before, agreed to take a look at Bentley. If anyone could shed light on the mystery surrounding him, it was her. Bentley sat perfectly still on the examination table, his posture rigid yet composed. He didn't whimper or resist as Dr. Bennett ran her hands over his body, checking his paws, his teeth, his ears. When she reached the back of his neck, however, she paused. Benjamin leaned in. "What is it?" Dr. Bennett carefully parted Bentley's fur, revealing a small, barely noticeable scar just beneath the thick coat. Her fingers traced the area, her expression darkening. "This," she murmured, "is where a microchip used to be." Benjamin's stomach tightened. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold rush through him. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded. "It's an old removal scar. Whoever did this was thorough. They didn't just deactivate the chip, they physically removed it." A heavy silence filled the room. Microchips weren't just plucked out of a dog for no reason. Bentley hadn't simply been abandoned. He had been erased. Dr. Bennett pulled out a scanner and ran it over Bentley's body, checking for any residual signals. Nothing. Whoever had taken the chip had made sure there was no trace left behind. That meant one thing. Someone didn't want this dog to be found. Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. His mind worked through the implications, trying to fit the pieces together. He'd heard of stolen dogs before, especially high-value breeds. But this wasn't just any German shepherd. Bentley was trained. He had skills that only came with years of specialized instruction. And then, a memory struck him. A theft. A year ago, a military K-9 training facility had been raided, losing several high-profile working dogs overnight. The case had made headlines briefly, but without leads, it had faded into the background. Could Bentley be one of them? Benjamin's pulse quickened. If Bentley had been part of that theft, then someone had gone to great lengths to keep him hidden. And if that someone found out he had resurfaced, they wouldn't just let him go. They'd come looking. Benjamin's instincts proved right sooner than he expected. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, a sharp knock echoed through the house. The sound was firm, deliberate. It wasn't a neighbor or a friendly visit. It was something else. Benjamin exchanged a glance with Emily, already feeling the tension in the air. He stood, moving toward the door, but before he could reach it, Bentley was already there. The German shepherd's body went rigid, his ears pinned forward, a low growl building in his throat. He stood directly between Sophia and the entrance, his stance protective, his amber eyes locked on the unseen visitor. Benjamin slowly cracked the door open. A man stood on the porch, dressed in dark jeans and a leather jacket, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Evening," the man drawled, tilting his head slightly. "Nice dog you've got there." Benjamin's grip tightened on the door frame. He knew this type. Calm, controlled, but dangerous. "Can I help you?" The man's smirk widened. "Actually, yeah. That dog, he's mine." Sophia gasped softly behind Bentley, clutching onto Emily's arm. Bentley's growl deepened. Benjamin kept his expression neutral. "That so?" "Yep," the man said smoothly. "Goes by a different name now, I see, but I recognize him." He gestured lazily toward Bentley, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Good to see he's still got some fight in him." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "Who are you?" The man casually leaned against the doorframe. "Darren Mitchell," he said. "I run a business. Let's call it training, if you will. That dog was part of my program until he went missing." Benjamin didn't move. His mind raced, piecing things together. Mitchell. That name rang a bell. There had been whispers about an underground network trafficking high-value working dogs, training them for brutal and illegal purposes. And now, one of those men was standing on his porch. Bentley snapped his jaws, taking a step forward, his entire body coiled like a spring. It wasn't just aggression. It was recognition. He knew this man, and he hated him. Mitchell exhaled through his nose, glancing at Bentley as if sizing him up. "Still got some fire in him. That's good." Then he turned his gaze back to Benjamin. "Look, I don't want trouble. Just hand him over, and we won't have a problem." Benjamin's voice was like steel. "That's not happening." Mitchell's smirk didn't falter, but the air shifted. The casual amusement in his eyes darkened into something more calculating. "I don't think you understand. That dog doesn't belong to you, and if you think keeping him is a good idea, well, that could be a mistake." Benjamin's fingers twitched at his side, resisting the urge to clench into fists. He wasn't a man who took well to threats. "Bentley isn't going anywhere," he said flatly. "Not now, not ever." Mitchell studied him for a long moment. Then, finally, he sighed, pushing off the doorframe. "All right, suit yourself," he said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "But I'd be careful if I were you. Dogs like him, they don't just go missing without someone looking for them." With that, he turned and walked down the porch steps, disappearing into the night. Benjamin watched him go, his mind already working on his next move. He had no doubt Mitchell would be back. He closed the door and turned to Bentley. The German shepherd's fur was still bristled, his body tense with lingering adrenaline. Benjamin crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on his back. "We're not letting him take you," he murmured. Bentley let out a low breath, his muscles relaxing just slightly. He turned his head toward Sophia, as if seeking reassurance. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "You're safe now," she whispered. And for the first time, Bentley believed it. The days following Mitchell's visit were tense. Benjamin could feel the threat hanging over their house like a storm cloud, heavy and inescapable. Mitchell wasn't the type to walk away empty-handed, and Benjamin knew a man like that wouldn't play fair. It didn't take long for his suspicions to be confirmed. A few days later, a legal notice arrived at their doorstep. Mitchell was suing for ownership of Bentley. The document was carefully crafted, backed by forged records, claiming that Bentley had been in his possession all along. He painted himself as the rightful owner of a trained working dog that had unfortunately gone missing and insisted that the Stewart family had stolen him. Emily read the papers with growing fury, slamming them onto the kitchen counter. "This is insane. He can't just claim Bentley like he's a lost piece of luggage." Benjamin exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "He doesn't care if it's insane. He just needs to make it enough of a hassle that we either give up or slip up." Sophia, who had been sitting at the table beside Bentley, looked up with wide, worried eyes. "He's not taking him," she whispered, wrapping her small arms tightly around the German shepherd's thick neck. Bentley remained perfectly still, as if he understood the weight of the moment. Benjamin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No, sweetheart, he's not." But that night, Mitchell made it clear that he wasn't relying on the legal system alone. The Stewarts were jolted awake by the blaring sound of their security alarm. Benjamin shot up in bed, his instincts from his military days kicking in instantly. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by his nightstand and sprinted down the hall. Before he even reached the stairs, he heard Bentley. The German shepherd's deep, guttural bark reverberated through the house, unlike anything they had ever heard from him before. It wasn't a warning bark. It was an alert, a declaration that something was very wrong. Benjamin reached the garage in seconds, flipping on the light just in time to see the damage. The side door had been forced open, the lock broken clean off. The security alarm continued to shriek through the house, but the intruder was already gone, probably scared off by Bentley before they could finish whatever they had planned. Bentley stood rigid in front of the door, teeth bared, every muscle in his body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. His amber eyes burned with something primal, something Benjamin had seen before in trained canines on deployment, the readiness to defend at all costs. Benjamin's stomach twisted. Mitchell wasn't just after Bentley. This wasn't about reclaiming a dog. This was about eliminating a problem. They needed help. The next morning, Benjamin made the call that would change everything. His contact at the FBI, an old friend from his time in the military, listened carefully as Benjamin recounted the past week. The legal threats, the break-in, Bentley's strange and highly trained behavior. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Send me a picture of the dog," the agent said. Benjamin did. Minutes later, the agent called back. His voice was tight, urgent. "That's not just any dog, Ben. That's Shadow." Benjamin felt the ground shift beneath him. Shadow, one of the most decorated K9s in military history, a legend in the search and rescue unit. A dog who had saved lives in disaster zones, who had been trained in tracking, protection, and emergency response at the highest level. And he had been stolen. The FBI had been tracking a network of stolen service dogs, and Mitchell was one of the key figures involved. The operation was bigger than anyone had imagined. K9s were being taken, stripped of their identities, and either sold on the black market or trained for brutal, illegal purposes. And Shadow, Bentley, was supposed to disappear forever. But he hadn't. Somehow, he had escaped. And now, Mitchell wanted him back, or gone. The FBI wasted no time launching an official investigation. Within days, agents uncovered evidence linking Mitchell to a broader criminal network, confirming that he wasn't just after Bentley. He was part of something much worse. But Mitchell must have sensed the net closing in, because before the authorities could make their move, he made his. It happened on a quiet evening. Emily was cooking dinner, Benjamin was reviewing court documents at the table, and Sophia was outside in the yard playing with Bentley. Then, she was gone. One moment, she had been laughing, tossing a ball for Bentley to chase. The next, the yard was empty, the gate left swinging open in the wind. Benjamin's blood ran cold. "Sophia!" Bentley was already ahead of him. The dog sprinted toward the gate, nose to the ground, his body locked into tracking mode. Mitchell had taken her. Benjamin didn't hesitate. He grabbed his truck keys and his firearm. "Bentley, let's go!" The German Shepherd didn't need to be told twice. Bentley led them straight to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Benjamin didn't wait for backup. His daughter was inside. Heart pounding, he forced his way into the dark building, gun raised. He barely took 2 steps before he heard her. "Daddy!" Sophia's voice, small, frightened. Then a growl, not from Bentley, from another dog. Benjamin's eyes adjusted to the dim light and his stomach twisted. There were other dogs here, big, aggressive, and trained for all the wrong reasons. Mitchell had backups, but Bentley wasn't afraid. The German Shepherd moved with quiet precision, positioning himself between Benjamin and the threat. His ears flattened, teeth bared, his muscles taut. Mitchell emerged from the shadows, a smug grin on his face. "You should have just handed him over," he said. Benjamin didn't waste words. "Let my daughter go." Mitchell laughed. "See, that's the thing. You've been a real pain, Stuart. And now I need to make sure you and that damn dog don't cause me any more trouble." He snapped his fingers. One of the attack dogs lunged. Bentley met it midair. The clash was fast, brutal, a blur of fur and teeth. Bentley didn't fight like a street dog. He fought like a soldier. Every move was controlled, precise, trained. He wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting. Within seconds, the threat was neutralized. Bentley turned his head toward Mitchell, and for the first time the man looked afraid, because he knew. This wasn't just some stolen dog. This was Shadow, and Shadow didn't lose. Before Mitchell could react, sirens blared outside. The FBI had arrived. It was over. Bentley stood firm, his amber eyes locked onto Mitchell as agents swarmed the warehouse. Sophia ran to Benjamin, sobbing into his chest. "He saved me," she whispered. Benjamin looked at Bentley, the dog who had once been left to die in the rain, who had fought his way back to life, and who had just saved his daughters. He crouched beside the German Shepherd, running a hand through his fur. "Yeah, sweetheart," Benjamin murmured. He did. The weeks following Mitchell's arrest were a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and endless questions. The story of Bentley, formerly known as Shadow, spread like wildfire. News outlets covered his journey from a decorated military K-9 to a stolen, abused animal, and finally to a hero who had not only escaped his captors, but had also saved a little girl's life. But the biggest question remained. What would happen to Bentley now? The FBI's K-9 division officially confirmed Bentley's past. He had been one of the most elite search and rescue dogs, trained for complex operations, disaster relief, and security missions. His disappearance had been a devastating loss to the unit, and now that he had been found, there was talk of returning him to service. Sophia overheard those conversations. One night, as Benjamin sat in the living room, flipping through old files on Bentley's service record, Sophia crawled onto the couch beside him, her small hands twisting the hem of her sleeve. Bentley lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, breathing slow and steady. "Do they really have to take him back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin looked at his daughter, taking in the way she curled against Bentley like he was her anchor. She had been through so much, kidnapped, threatened, ripped from safety, and through it all, Bentley had never left her side. Bentley lifted his head at the sound of her voice, his amber eyes finding hers. He wasn't a mindless soldier. He wasn't a machine waiting for orders. He had chosen her, just as she had chosen him. Benjamin exhaled. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted honestly. He was part of something bigger before. Sophia nodded slowly. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "But now, he's part of something else." The decision didn't take long after that. The FBI recognized that Bentley had already completed his service to his country. He had given years of his life to protecting others, and after everything he had endured, the trauma, the abuse, the escape, he had finally found a home. So, in a special retirement ceremony, Bentley was officially honorably discharged from service and granted permanent residency with the Stewart family. The look in Sophia's eyes when they told her the news was something Benjamin would never forget. Bentley wasn't just a rescue dog. He was family. Retirement, however, didn't mean Bentley was done helping people. Not long after settling into his new life, the local children's hospital reached out after hearing Bentley's story. Many of their young patients had suffered trauma, some from accidents, some from illness, some from experiences too painful for words. And Bentley had something those kids needed: understanding. The first time Bentley walked through the hospital doors, something incredible happened. A little boy, who had refused to speak to doctors for weeks, reached out to touch Bentley's fur. A girl recovering from a traumatic injury, who had shut herself off from the world, smiled for the first time in months. Bentley didn't need words. He just needed to be there. Sophia came with him on many of these visits, watching with quiet pride as her best friend offered comfort in ways no human ever could. Bentley's presence had such a profound effect that the hospital, along with local law enforcement and military K-9 units, created the Shadow Project. The program was dedicated to retired service dogs, offering them homes, rehabilitation, and second careers as therapy animals. Bentley was its first official ambassador, his legacy reaching far beyond Brooksville. He had been a warrior. He had been a survivor. And now, he was a healer. As Sophia often said, Bentley isn't just a hero, he's hope. The years passed, but the bond between Sophia and Bentley never faded. 10 years after that fateful storm, Sophia Carter was no longer the little girl who had once clung to Bentley in the back seat of her father's truck. She had grown into a determined young woman, dedicating her life to advocating for animal rights and the protection of working dogs like Bentley. Inspired by their journey, she studied animal behavior, spoke at national events, and worked closely with the Shadow Project, ensuring that retired service dogs received the care and respect they deserved. Bentley, now older, bore the signs of time. His once jet-black fur had turned silver around his muzzle, and his movements were slower, more deliberate. But his eyes, those deep, amber eyes, still held the same unwavering trust and loyalty. Even in his old age, he continued to accompany Sophia to hospitals and rehabilitation centers, offering his silent, steady presence to those in need. Their story had reached millions. Articles, documentaries, and news reports had been made about the dog who had been stolen, abandoned, rescued, and reborn as a healer. People across the world had been moved by Bentley's resilience and Sophia's unwavering love. Together they had shown that even the most broken souls could find their way home. And so, as Bentley lay beside Sophia on their front porch, watching the sunset with tired but content eyes, she whispered, "You were always meant to be here." This heartwarming story is more than just one of survival. It's a testament to the power of love, trust, and second chances. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, kindness can change a life. Bentley, a German shepherd once forgotten and discarded, found his way back not just to a family, but to a purpose. His journey highlights the deep, unspoken bond between humans and animals, proving that healing is a two-way street. Dog stories like this one inspire us to see beyond appearances, to recognize the silent struggles of those who cannot speak for themselves. Bentley's story isn't just about rescue, it's about redemption, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of unconditional loyalty. It's a call to action for us all, to protect, to love, and to believe in the incredible spirit of every dog waiting for their own second chance. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.